after 10. So we're going to call the meeting to order. And we're going to check, is there introductions of late items? No. Everybody okay with the agenda?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Minutes of previous meetings is none. This is for the for the special council meeting agenda for November 20th, 2021 for 10 a.m. And obviously we're doing this hybrid and an open meeting in chambers. So let's go down to petition and delegations. We have none. Correspondence. We have none. Councilors report. Does any councilors have any reports? Nope. I see none. Reports of committees? Nope. Mayor's report. There's a truck parade happening on December 17th, where they're going to light up the trucks. They're going to start, I believe, over at the junction, and they're going to be coming down through the valley and into the village. From what I understand, they're also going to be going up McMillan. It's really weather dependent. If there's a lot of snow and ice, then they'll just go straight down into the gazebo area, but otherwise they're going to go up into McMillan. Sayward Futures is also involved, and it's a fire department driven event. I was speaking to Frank from the Fisher Boy yesterday, and some people had some ideas in terms of at the time when the truck parade does hit our gazebo area, we at that time have a lit Christmas tree ceremony for Christmas, which I think would be pretty cool. So when everybody's down there and all the kids are down there, we light up a Christmas tree. Now, also with that tied in would be a Valley Village combined. The best house, decorated house, would receive, say, 1, 2, and 3 and 4th prize. Not separating and saying it's the best one in the valley or the best one in the village, but a combination. So we can try to eliminate a little bit of that Valley Village type thing. So we're looking at the possibility of getting a gift certificate or a donation from, for example, the gift shop, also from the Fisher Boy. We'll talk to the co-op and the Crossroads as well, because we want to try to keep this local. So what I'm asking for is if council believes it's a good idea and wants to get involved in this, so we can have something, because we've had very little for our community since COVID has started. And I think it's going to be a nice tie-in, a nice event. We can find a company that can come out and actually decorate the tree for us and do a lighting ceremony. We can't, obviously, because of liability issues, we can't have everybody, all the residents go out there and start throwing strings of lights up and going up ladders and so on and so forth. So what are your thoughts? Let's start with Councillor Tinsley.
It sounds like excellent plans. What type of budget would we be looking for to have professionals install a tree and light it up? And
well, we would use one of the existing trees that are down there. I would have to make some phone calls. I'm not sure if there is a company in Campbell River or around that does that kind of thing, or even how much that would cost. But even if we say we set a budget, we use some of the COVID funds that we had available, and we have, say, the fire department decorate the tree prior to, and then we have the lighting ceremony. Any other question?
Nope, that makes total sense. Thank you.
Councillor Craig?
Yeah, I actually had the exact same idea and presented the exact same concept to council 2 years ago, using the fire department to light up our tree outside of the tennis courts, and that idea was rejected by council at the time due to budgetary concerns and tree condition and whatnot. So you'd have to find a different tree than the one outside of the tennis courts, like the one I proposed. But since I proposed the exact same idea, I can't be in objection to it now. So I would agree with that.
Councillor Paulson?
I think it's a great idea. We have met with Sayward Futures has had a meeting, and we allocated a $200 budget to set up in the gazebo to give out hot dogs and hot chocolate when all the trucks and everything arrives in the village, and just have a little celebration. So since that meeting with Sayward Futures, the fire department and Faith and Frank have come forward with offers of supplies, hot dogs and buns and things that have been left over from their car show in the summertime, and things that have been like wieners and buns that have been refrigerated. So I don't think we'll have to spend the full $200 on buying the supplies to give out. But I just thought that one way to use part of that budget is to, as for the Christmas tree, the home decorating, providing a gift basket as one of the prizes from the Ocean View gift store. So, I think I'm pretty sure that I can use that money anyway suitable for the evening. So we're certainly willing to do that.
Thank you. I would guess, judging by the cost of lights and Christmas decorations, I would guess we're probably going to be looking at a budget between $1,000 to $1,500. Would probably be a reasonable budget for that. If it could be done for less, that would be great. But however, what we don't want to run into a situation where we make it look like a Charlie Brown Christmas for the Village Valley. So I would like to propose a motion that resolution that the village sets a budget for $1,500 to light up a Christmas tree for December 17th, 2021. Do I have a motion, please?
I'll move that.
Councillor Paulson, second.
I'll second it.
Discussion? Councillor Tinsley?
So just to clarify, we should be able to use the restart grant, right? For those funds.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Favor.
Opposed? No opposed? And the motion is carried. Thank you. Unfinished business? None. Staff reports? None. Bylaws? None. New business, and the primary reason why we're here today is the 2022 strategic planning session. Okay, so we'll turn it over to the CAO.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. I know the camera's not going to shoot over to me because I'm sitting here, but I can see everybody. I can hear you, so hopefully you can hear me. Okay, so thank you for this. So we're going to start with the draft that I sent, and it's just an opportunity to get things going, obviously. And I think the main purpose of today is to try and really put some focus on what you as a council can achieve in the next 12 months, or less than 12 actually, because you probably go in October, right? And so 10 months really. But also it provides a good a track record of what you've done and also what needs to be done for the next council, because it's a continuation of the strategic plan from the previous year and the year before that. There's some carryover documents, and then there's some things that are removed altogether. So there's basically the themes that you see on the front page: economic development, community relations, village operations, tourism development, professional development, living green, and infrastructure and asset replacement. Those are the key strategic priority theme areas. And so maybe what we can do is just start going through it. Basically, what you'll see on page 4, which is the beginning of it, starting with community relations, is in red, the updated suggested work that I've included. Of course, this is your purpose today, is to revise that or to add to or remove. And then everything that's stroked out was in the last year's 2020 strategic plan. Now, we didn't have one in 2021 because, of course, you were elected in 2020, the most, 3 of 5. And it just wasn't something that we did last year, but previous years, this would carry over from. So maybe we can just start with the first one. The first one, so it's basically broken down in priorities, and then the measure. How do we know when it's been achieved? And then the timeline. And we can be specific there. You can put everything into 2022, or you can bring it forward to 2024. Some of them are obviously like the infrastructure replacement. That's more probably like a 10-year project, but there'd be some short-term terms that goals so that the timing can be as loose or as specific as you wish. So maybe we'll just start with the first one. The first one, of course, is a follow-up from our meeting with the Comox First Nation. So show progress towards reconciliation with Comox First Nation and other First Nations. There's a few suggestions there for progress measures. Obviously, future meetings, agreements, those sorts of things are what show progress towards having achieved some progress on reconciliation, but that's what we can fill in today, more information on that.
Sorry to jump in. So in terms of the signage that we discussed with KFN, signage at the totem pole and adding some signage to our village entrance as well, is this a time where we would set a budget on that and
not so much
consult?
Yeah, not so much a budget, but just identify that it's in here. You know, in some cases we'll know what the budget is, but this could be what you use when you develop your financial plan now starting in January. You know, those meetings that we had every week last year. This is the time during the financial planning to take the key items that you've included in your plan here and put the numbers in them at the financial plan meetings coming in January.
I think we should set a timeline on getting that signage as a step in that direction. Does everybody agree on that? Councillor Tinsley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think there's a couple of things. We can separate the signage as you describe beyond summer. I would 2022. I would suggest that the acknowledgement of meetings taking place on unceded territory is something that we could achieve at the beginning of the year.
Agreed. So the signage part, we should. I can't see that taking more than a few months based on frost, ground frost, and whether to put that in. Councillor Polson?
I know that
You're up. There you go. Nope. There you go.
I know that the tourism committee has received a grant from Kusum Climb about the last time it was run. So that was in 2019, and that was for $1,000. And we have been discussing also with Rec Sites and Trails the opportunities to post appropriate signage for tourists and also for locals too, to find these places and maintain the signs. So and also work with the Kusum Climb Committee on designating or identifying where designated signs could go. And I know that the Tourism Committee has a budget. Rec Sites and Trails has a budget, and I know Sayward Futures could probably come up with a budget for some signage. And if we make it within the village and also in the valley, and include Comox First Nations signage and trail markings, it would really work towards, I think, securing our a stronger relationship with KFN. Just as out of interest, last summer I applied to KFN by asking them if our rec sites and trails maintenance people could go in and clear out the trail that's so overgrown on the trail to out to the, what's it called?
Port Coosa?
Yeah, Port Coosa, thanks. And I didn't ever get a reply for them, but I know that there were First Nations people working in the valley at the time. So I think that's something that we can continue to pursue. So, and that would certainly take the steps towards what we're hoping to accomplish with acknowledging their presence in the valley or in the village.
So have, what you're saying is signs on the estuaries, on the trails, as well as the totem in the village, correct?
That's right. And the funding also extended out to the rec sites and trails. So, and a lot of that is considered First Nations land, and rec sites and trails works with the First Nations on maintaining those trails and acknowledging that the property or that the land is traditional territory.
Thank you, Councillor Craig.
Actually, I don't really have a whole lot to add there. Councillor Tinsley and Councillor Polson nailed it pretty good. I would suggest that two things. If you're going to be putting signs out in the valley, you should coordinate with the Valley Director, Gerald Wally, for communication purposes and cooperation. The second thing I would suggest is Gerald Wally has some insight of local governments changing the word from unceded to traditional territory. And I think that's something that this council should discuss with the Comox First Nations, as that's going to be a sticking point in the future.
Okay. Thank you. CAO.
Thank you. Thank you. Just on, there are some restrictions to spending village money outside village boundaries. That's something to be mindful of for the trail work, and it would require any kind of service outside the jurisdictions would require a service agreement with. So that gets complicated, but not really complicated, just an extra step. And as far as the wording, yes, I've worked with the Comox First Nation in the past on wording. It's very political, so be mindful of that. I think Gerald Wally might have a political take on it, which might be different from the villages. So I think working towards developing a language that's acceptable to council will be important. It might not be the same because people are using different language, but I think it is important to talk with KFN. They've been helpful before in establishing that.
Okay, so we need to set a timeline. Is that not correct?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I think having it in here to be done in 2022 within the 2022 financial plan is probably enough for right now. It can be more finalized in terms of timing. We don't know how long it'll take to design and develop and instruct and install. There's some questions there, but obviously we want to get it done in the 2022 year, and it could be broken down by season. That would be enough.
Thank you. So move on to the next.
So the next item is to continue to negotiate a framework agreement with Western Forest Products. We talked about this at the last meeting. There's some progress been made. I think the parties have agreed that yes, it makes sense to communicate before they have early morning starts. We've asked for 14 days, and sometimes it won't work because if you get a hot spell, they have to start early. But some communication and some communication regarding their surface treatment for dust would be helpful. A bit of an annual plan would be helpful, a little bit more. I mean, basically what council wants to do is to, I guess, get the company to commit to things so that right now it's all in their hands. If somebody phones and complains about dust, they'll say, well, we've done that. We're not, we know how to do it. We've done it. So I think it's not unreasonable to ask for a bit of a plan in writing as to how they do it, how often they do it, what their terms are. And that could be part of the agreement. And then, of course, the big sticking point is what's the give back if the company needs to start at 5 or 6 and disturb people who live just above there, then there should be something offered. And I don't know what that's going to be. They've made some efforts, I guess, to try and work with us, but without actually being able to concede anything on that point. Maybe council's fine with that, with just having communications as the only piece. But I think it's worth trying to try and get some commitment to some give back. If they're going to be early morning starts that affect people's lives, then for the company's benefit and to accommodate everybody else's schedule, then there should be something. But so an agreement in place to clarify those terms will be helpful, and that's something that the new CAO can pick up. And bring back to council sometime in the next 3 months, hopefully prior to spring, prior to the hot weather.
Yeah, we also have to look at, it just can't be a letter of understanding. There has to be some type of legal document that we can hold their feet to the fire, so to speak. And it's not just the early morning starts, it's the overnights as well. That is quite a concern. And a letter of understanding, there's really no bite to that. And we need to have some type of legal agreement in writing with that. Does anybody else have any comments on that? Oh,
I can
CAO.
add one more thing on that. Yes, a legal agreement versus a letter of understanding. Now, the company has offered to draft that and have their lawyers look at it. I don't think that's the best idea because what we're proposing is a legal agreement that would be the basis of an amendment to the noise bylaw. So there'd be a specific provision in the bylaw to enable that. And that's why the agreement's so important. Right now, they're sort of just starting with no heed given. And I don't think they're happy with that either, but they're kind of trapped in that box where they need to get going. They need, they have so many supply lines around them, the truckers, all of the pieces to the whole puzzle. So they're really keen to keep that going, but of course the council has to deal with the complaints. So this might work. This might get some progress, and I think at least notification will be a good start.
Any comments from council?
Oh, sorry, it's Mr. Mayor, Councillor Tinsley. Just I believe it's just a clerical error. It says spring 2020 on there. We just need to correct that to spring 2022.
Catch, thank you.
Next one is continuing to work with the SRD to clarify the shared fire service. And that's, of course, council's on top of that one. So hopefully by the summer of 2022.
Any comments from council? No. Moving on.
The next one involves developing stronger partnerships with the Nature's Trust. Now, council will see shortly a staff report based on the feedback we've received to date on the official community plan, because in addition to having a community forum with the KFN, we also circulated the document widely to a number of government agencies and other agents, including the Nature's Trust, of course, and their response back, which we summarized in a report for you. But basically their comments back were that they would like to be recognized as a partner as well at the beginning because they own almost a quarter of the village. And there's plenty of advantages to developing that partnership with the Nature's Trust. There's a number of things that that the parties have in common, managing the environment around the estuary. Of course, the residents commented on that in the official community plan quite a bit, that how much people value their natural environment. They have indicated that they have a few things that they are concerned about. Of course, sea level rise in the river is a big concern because they'll lose a lot of those shorelines that form the nesting and habitat for birds, migrating birds. And that's a concern of the Nature's Trust because as the river rises, you lose all those weedy fields out in the middle of the estuary. They're also concerned about an overabundance of Canada geese. We heard that on our OCP meeting, and I think they'd like to have a shoot day. So that would be a really good joint venture for the village to get into, where they have a one-day shoot of Canada geese, and it's planned and it's advertised, and it's a matter, that's something that they would like to do. Now, of course, I'm a birder. I wouldn't be here that day, but they are concerned about the abundance of geese. So that's something that you might be able to work with, or not. I'm just reporting on what their concerns are and their interests are. So there's also an opportunity for some interpretive signage. You'll note that their property as you come into the village was also quite damaged by the 2018 windstorm, and there's a lot of dry fall in there. And I had the Wildland Fire folks come out sometime this summer and do an estimate as to whether or not there was a risk there for wildfire. That and the big property that's Western Timbers up on the hill on the other side, the left-hand side next to that house. So they've identified a few things that could be done to manage the fuel loads in there. And I think it's Western has some plans to do some trenching to keep people out, but they've already done quite a bit of replanting, so that's not as big a worry. But the property owned on the other side, the Nature's Trust is concerned about access, because they don't want to build a road to get in there to remove all the windfall. But of course, locals could go in there with their own vehicles, little ATVs and side-bys. And so there's an opportunity for a good partnership there to remove the fuel loads in that area. And I think the Nature's Trust would probably be receptive to that because it's a lot of work for them. But it's an opportunity to work with them to either reduce the fuel load or maybe even have some interpretive signage that explains why it's such a mess, why it's left as a natural environment, why it's full of habitat, because it has an unsightly image to it unless you realize that it's part of that natural habitat. So there's a bit of both that could be done there, some fuel load reduction and then also some interpretive signage to clarify why they leave it the way they do. And I think that would be a really good project to work on them with, and they'd probably be keen on that.
Yeah, personally, everything you said makes sense and agreed, other than I don't know how I feel about the whole one-day execution of
I know.
Canada geese. That I have kind of an issue with, but any other councillors have comments on that?
On the Canada geese, I'm sure it would be politically tough and as our national bird, I'm no birder. I'm not sure we'd be able to do that, but I could be wrong.
Councillor Polson, you had your hand up, or you were reaching for your Councillor Craig?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I wouldn't mind a little bit of clarification exactly what kind of a partnership is Nature's Trust proposing. Partnerships are usually there's a financial benefit. No, not all the time, but in this case, is there some sort of a financial benefit to a partnership, or is there some economic development to a partnership? What exactly? If you could clarify the word partnership for me, I would appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Thank you through the chair to Councillor Craig. Well, partnership is, I mean, it doesn't have to be, that doesn't have to be the verb here. It could be an opportunity to work closely with them to promote mutual goals. And they're interested, they're interested in a partnership or being recognized as an important partner because of the way the OCP lays out at the beginning, partnerships with other agencies, including Western Forest, Comox First Nation, and the Strathcona Regional District. So they wanted to be recognized as on that footing since they own a quarter of the land and they have a lot of interests here. So, you know, the word you use is your word, but I think they would like to see a highlighted presence. Now, what could that benefit? Well, there's lots of things. They could work with you on interpretive signage. There could be, I don't think the Nature's Trust is too keen on promoting the estuary as a tourist resort, and I don't know why you would want to do that because it's really meant to protect the wildlife that's there. So, and there isn't any local businesses here that would benefit directly from a lot of tourists coming into the village to go to the estuary. So that is something that's a little harder to put a finger on because the more you promote it, the less valuable it becomes because it gets intruded with people. You know, some of the Nature's Trust parks and trails around the province are so busy that, they spend a lot of their time cleaning up and having a presence there managing public. So I don't know how keen they are to promote that, but that's the sort of partnership that you would want to talk with them about. I think certainly interpretive signages would be good.
Okay.
Any other comments? No. Okay, so we'll move on.
Next one is the fireworks bylaw. We have a good response that we've received, so staff will summarize that. There's basically a continuum of options there. Council can go very, very restrictive and only allow for the fireworks by commercial operators who are fully licensed on certain days. Those are the only times you have them. In a certain location, all the way to the most permissive, which would be getting a permit from the fire chief and then having him come and look at your site and you clarify the times, the dates and that sort of thing. And you're allowed to have your fireworks during that period, so-called consumer fireworks. So that would be the most permissive. We don't really know what the response of the community will be, but of course, council had passed a resolution 2 years ago, 2019, when it took second reading of the bylaw, and then decided to find out what the community wanted in terms of how restrictive that bylaw should be. There is a minimum threshold because of the federal laws. So there is some restrictions, more so than it's in place right now, which is pretty much anybody setting off anything at any time. So that should come in, and then council will have all the results and make a decision as to how to go.
Do you believe we'll have the results on that survey by the December 7th meeting?
They might, well, I know there's a big stack in my office right now, so it's a question of whether that can be rolled up for you and summarized and put together. Yeah.
Thank you. Council, do you have any questions? No? Okay, moving on. Thank you.
Next one relates to building a collaborative relationship with Sayward residents by working together collaboratively and requiring a collaborative style of communications with council and staff. And that is, I think, pretty straightforward. Now you'll see in there on the right-hand column, online survey, that I think I forgot to strike that out, but it hasn't necessarily been done, but I'm not sure what council's views are on that. You obviously don't want to be going to the citizens on every issue all the time, but this is a carryover from a previous plan, so we can strike that out unless council wants to leave it in. But there are things you can do, of course, to build collaborative relationships, some of which you've done already by providing for the revised council procedures bylaw, providing for the speaker hearing the sound system so that citizens can hear those, the newsletters. Those are sorts of things that can keep people informed and provide for a sense of connection and part of the system. But there could be other things as well.
Any feedback, council, or ideas? No? I think at one point, maybe when COVID is not as prevalent, we should be looking at doing an annual town hall meeting. And that would give an opportunity for the residents to come out and not as such as a structured format as what we have with council. But of course, with COVID at the moment, that'll be next to impossible to pull off until that's resolved, in my opinion. Thank you.
The next one is to resolve deficiencies with 794 and 765 properties. Now, we will be looking at that later. We have obtained some legal advice as to how to proceed, and council has some options. And I think the owner is also keen on getting this resolved. I've had a call recently from his lawyer, and so I think there's some progress there, but it's definitely good to keep on track there to getting that resolved. Mostly we want to have those two parties who own those properties be able to obtain a building permit, hook up to water and sewer, and continue to enjoy their properties without any liability to the village.
Any comments? Seeing none, move on.
Next one involves, previously there was in the strategic plan from previous years, there was mayor and council to submit a monthly update that it could be anybody from the village who submits that. You might want to, maybe you want to pick one of you among the 5 to write a newsletter, or you maybe want to take a turn each month. You might want to have your CAO continue doing it, or your CFO. There's plenty of options there, so I've left it as village, because then you can decide. You know, one option might be for you to have a regular column that you each take turns writing, or bi-monthly is fine too. That's something you can discuss, or we can discuss it now.
Council, any comments? Councillor Craig?
Yeah, actually, this initiative came through with the previous council and the recommendation of John McDonald, former Mayor John McDonald, and he came up with this plan because he was always the one writing the monthly update to provide council, the sitting members of council, with an opportunity to put their 2 cents in on behalf of council as well. I thought it was a good idea at the time. I still think it's a good idea at the time, and this council should recommend putting pen to paper and writing from your own perspectives, not on behalf of council, because only the mayor can legally speak on behalf of council, but on behalf of your individual views, thoughts, and ideas as a sitting councillor, as an individual councillor. And that's my 2 cents on that.
Okay, thank you. I disagree to where I think if whoever writes this article, it's going to be on behalf of council. It can't be just their own thoughts and opinions, because that may vary substantially from the rest of council. So I don't, I'm not comfortable with that. Councillor Paulson, you had a comment?
I think that anything that's put into a report is reflects on council, and so it should be as per council's opinion, or you know, like we might vote on something and 2 people are opposed, but the majority rules. And I do find it a little disturbing when I see reports by the regional director that are seem to be his personal opinion rather than what's happened at the committee meetings that I've been a part of. So I think we do need to keep it related to council's take on things rather than personal opinions.
Councillor Tinsley?
I would agree with Councillor Paulson and you, Mr. Mayor. I think it is very important that that the position is reporting on council's decisions or aspects of things council is working on. More of a reporting on the facts, which brings the information to the public who don't have the time or aren't able to listen to the meetings and follow everything. I think that it's important that that control be in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Craig?
Sure, if you want to go that route, then what you can do is you can have individual counselors pen the whatever they wish to pen, and then have council vet their their words that they've written to ensure that they meet with council's approval, so they can legally speak on behalf of council. Having said that, if an individual elected official like Gerald Wally or myself or anybody else on this council wishes to put pen to paper and record their own views, well, they are more than welcome to do so as their own column in the Sayward News or Campbell River Mirror or wherever else, because, you know, freedom of the press exists, or freedom of speech does exist for a reason, and they do elect individual councilors for their individual opinion. Having said that, if you want a specific will of council, then definitely vet every single official council article via the council.
I agree. Thank you. CAO?
Thank you. I just wanted to remind you that the purpose of this theme is to build relations with the community. This is all about building a good relationship with the village and citizens. And so really council is the authority to carry out that work. And so it really has to come from council as a unit rather than individual councillors, because once council passes a resolution, that is an entity of its own, right? And it reflects that view of that of council. So this particular item is really meant to provide an opportunity for the village to keep track of what's going on, because they're not always going to read every minute and watch every council meeting. But I know people do read the news, and when all the items that council's passed in the last month is on there, sometimes I'll get a call about something, but it does provide an immediate summary of what you've done in the last month. And that's really the point, rather than individual views on things, because individual views are going to be maybe sometimes different than council as a decision. And so having an individual view published doesn't do anything at all to improve community relations. It makes it look like council's divided. So I think it really is important that it be a council submission of here's what we've done in the last month or 2 months.
I agree. And Councillor Craig's suggestion that it's vetted by council if a council member is going to submit something for the newsletter and prior to being actually published is the way to go. Thank you. Anything else on that topic? Councillor Tinsley?
So with this and the preceding item, we don't have any timelines. Are they just considered to be ongoing in the right-hand column? At least not on my.
Yes, yeah, that would be considered to be ongoing.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on.
Next one, work with the SRD on funding for services jointly used by all Valley residents, recreation, fire, health. For example, one thing that we do need is to come up with a shared agreement to operate the van in the Valley, because we do provide services to Valley residents with the van. It's not a problem, but we should have a shared agreement with the Valley to do that with the SRD to be able to operate that service. Yeah. I've talked to Tom Yates about that. It's not a complicated step. It's just one that wasn't done when they started the service. So it's you know, it's on the pile. It's not on the top of the pile, but technically anytime you offer citizens services outside your jurisdiction, you should have an agreement with the other jurisdiction. That's in the community charter. You know, it's one of those housekeeping things. It's not going to stop any services, but it should be cleaned up. And this is sort of like that. So working with the SRD for any of those services. Now, of course, it would be really nice to get a shared service agreement with the SRD on recreation as well, and that should be sought. I know not all. I know the area director doesn't support it, but citizens might. And so that it's worth pursuing, because again, we're offering services to people outside the jurisdiction. There's an equity issue because they're not paying for it the same way. And then, but of course their revenues are important, but it's the sort of thing that could be pursued.
Yeah, one of the things with, in terms of recreation, I know that eventually, and it should be within hopefully the next 2, 3 months, where the SRD is going to have that study regarding rec centers across the entire SRD. It's just a question of when that's going to be completed.
Right.
Councillor Paulson?
I'd like to suggest that.
Oh, there you go.
I'd like to suggest that we also add, as well as recreation, fire, health, we add waste management and the hospital. Well, the health comes under the hospital board, but waste management is certainly, we share that with the CSVC. Anyways, it's the Comox Strathcona. We do have an agreement, but there's also a section of the waste management where the valley pays for the $6,000 a year for the cleanups that are held, I think 3 or 4 times a year. So I think if we can work in collaboration with the regional district on that, and that would probably help to bridge a lot of the division that's felt.
Is it always the cleanups that are done at main roads, is that always paid for by the SRD or from Area A?
Yes, Comox Strathcona Regional Waste Management. And that cleanup is paid out of Director Wally's budget because it's in the Sayward Valley area.
Do we have a budget for that as well? And do we contribute financially, or can we?
Yes, I think we do contribute to that. Again, just as background, so when the Comox Strathcona Regional District was restructured in about 2008, I think it was, the provincial government mandated the restructuring, and then part of the restructuring included the parties retaining joint ownership of those 2 projects, so the hospital and the regional solid waste facility. So that's why it's regulated by those two Strathcona regional districts as well as the Comox regional district. So it would be the same as any other service that we work with the SRD, except it's got this bigger layer on it. So we would have contributions for that, and then there'd be some contributions from the SRD as well.
Okay, thank you. Any comments? Councillor Craig?
I do believe that the Village of Sayward is on the board of the waste management CVRD meetings. I know that former councillor Bill Ives was a member of that board, so we do have our contribution in there, politically speaking, at any rate, as well as the hospital board. I believe we, former councillor Bill Ives was also on the hospital board, if memory serves.
Correct. It's Councillor Paulson has those 2 that she's been working with. My concern was, or not concern, my question more goes to monetarily. I mean, whether or not we financially contribute to the cleanup.
Well, that's more, Your Honor, Mr. Mayor, that's more of a question for our CFO. I'm not sure exactly how much we contribute, if that contribution comes out of our taxes, out of our tax base or not. It very well may have, but I'd prefer the CFO actually find that answer out and give us an answer to that.
Hey, thank you. Councillor Paulson?
I can actually give you an answer to that. As of next year, the waste management taxes will be 0.3801 on every $1,000 of assessed value of your property. And that's the same as the previous year. So, and that comes out of the tax requisitions that is sent to Sayward. So we do contribute our portion, but at the meetings, the votes are often weighted, and so there is more votes for the larger areas. Like Campbell River and Comox and Cumberland. So even to vote against something that is proposed doesn't very often stand a chance of being voted down or voted in favor of, depending on which way it's going. So it is a complex system, this waste management system. And in the new year, Campbell River will be having a site for composting collection and deposit at the site that's being built in Campbell River at the moment. So of course that increases Campbell River's economic development, but it reasons stands that it needs to be in a more central area. So that's why we have our local recycle collections here, and it's picked up regularly by the waste management. So hope that answers your question.
No, it actually,
Councillor Craig?
it actually did through the chair there. I'll be more specific. Does the taxes, the 0.83% of our taxes, do that, any portion of those taxes go to pay for the Sayward cleanup days? Or is Gerald Wally just spending all of his own money on those specific dates? So does any portion of our taxes go towards cleanup days? Was specifically where I was kind of going with that.
Okay, sorry, CAO?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's important to remember that under the community charter, all services are required to be paid for by those citizens who benefit from them. That's just a basic rule. It's kind of right up there with developer pay rule. So any service that's offered to a citizen there is a tax that's required by that citizen to support that service. So yes, this would be part of the service. Now, I think for today's purposes, we should really try and focus on the strategic goals, because the financial planning meetings that start in January is when you're going to get into ascribing money for each item. And that's the time to really pull apart how much you want to spend on what and how much you spend now. But this is the first step to that, because you're saying this is what we want to get done. And this is why. And so therefore, when you get into the money part, this is how you put the money into it. And then that's the time to get the CFO would be here, and she'll be able to have all those numbers, because as you remember from last year, we went through a different budget each week. So when you get to the solid waste budget, that's the time to look at exactly how much is contributed for each of those services. Now, sometimes those cleanup days, for example, you'll see that we'll put in a grant application, and so it'll be fully funded through the grant. And oftentimes some of it is free rather, like the fire smart cleanup and the roadside pickup, those kinds of things. And so sometimes there is grant funding available that isn't part of that financial plan, but generally people who benefit from a service pay for the service.
Thank you. Councillor Craig, you have your hand up. You're muted, Councillor Craig.
There we go. Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the CAO's comments on that. I wasn't meaning to get into a financial aspect of the conversation. It's just that we were talking about the joint SRD services and developing a more shared agreement system. And we got into the conversation as to whether the village contributes to the Sayward cleanup days. So now that appears that question's been answered, I'm free to move on, that we do contribute to that. So we do have a a mutual benefit there.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Next one is, again, the final one that we've got listed here now, community relations relates, and it could be under emergency planning, I guess, but I don't think we have that here. Make arrangements for community cooling center for the community safety during hot summer periods. We talked at the last time of putting a request for quotes on the BC bid page to be able to get some quotes to do both air exchange for the administrative building and the possibility for cooling the gym. So that's something that is on the list for follow-up. Some of these items come from previous resolutions, and this would be one of them.
Okay, thank you. Any comments, council? No. Councillor Tinsley, sorry.
Nope.
No. Thank you. So we'll go on to economic development.
So the first one here relates to housing, and there's been more and more interest in housing. Of course, as everybody knows, I must have spent I must have talked to about 3 different people in the last day or two on the 2 lots, the 2 vacant lots that are for sale right now and listed with a realtor. There's 2 lots on McMillan. So there's a lot of interest in picking up all those lots. Of course, the new lot that was recently purchased next to the apartments is proposed to house a 4-plex. So council will be seeing some action there. But I think the most important piece for council to do to support housing is to update the zoning bylaw, because the zoning bylaw is old. It has to be updated to align with the new official community plan, and it can provide for clarity and ease for people to develop their properties. We probably need to upgrade the flood construction level now that there's new flood data. So there's a few things there that zoning bylaw can accommodate. And also the building calculation process. Currently, we have the building calculations in the fees and charges bylaw, and really council's leaving way too much money on the table there for building permits. And that's not only important for revenues to be able to support your administrative functions, but the cost of a building permit is what goes to, every time we issue a building permit, it's registered with BC Assessments. And they have that as part of their formula that they use to assess properties. And that comes back to basically your overall revenues, which is tax revenues, as well as the assessed values of properties. So it's really important that that building permit fee be aligned. There's a tool called the Marshall and Stewart Estimator, so you can look that up. What that does is you put in, it's basically a program, or there's other obviously vehicles that are not all electronic, but essentially it takes the current price of construction values and it calculates the price. So if you've got a single story, how big are the rooms, how many bedrooms, it calculates the area for porches and accessory buildings, and it comes up with a value. And that's the value that's used to complete the assessed cost of a building permit, and then that becomes the value of the home. So for example, we've issued a building permit fairly recently at 250, but you know, it's not possible really to build a home for 250,000 easily anymore because of the cost of construction. So that house would then be valued at that value. So that's why it's so important to get that number right, because it affects your revenues. So that should be done as part of the economic development measure, not only to create for better housing construction by the consumer, but also to make it more equitable so that people are spending, you know, the actual costs are real true costs, as opposed to just arbitrary numbers that are old and out of date.
Any comments, council? No. Okay,
No.
moving on. Sorry, Councillor Craig.
Yeah, sorry, I'm slow on getting my hand up. Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I'm reverberating. Short. I agree with the CAO. We definitely need to update our zoning bylaws as well as our fees charge, because it looks at tax burdens on our citizens. And we do have a lot of land that can be developed. That's more that we align our fees and structures accordingly, the less of a tax burden to our regular citizens will be. I am familiar with the Marshall and Stewart estimators as well as the evaluator programs and the Marshalls and the BOICs in the insurance industry. So I agree with the CAO's assessment that we need to align to the 21st century on this.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Thank you. Okay, the next one is to finalize the official community plan. As I've mentioned, council has reviewed the draft. It's been reviewed by KFN, which we'll be talking about later. We've got some feedback from one citizen, the BC Nature's Trust and the Agricultural Land Commission, who wanted to have some inclusion in the community plan for I think there's 4 properties that are within the ALR within the village, and somehow we missed that. So we need to have a designation in the OCP for agricultural land, and that you'll see that in the revised draft, as well as the steps towards reconciliation that we heard from KFN, and then one citizen had spent quite a bit of time reviewing the development permit issues. Development permits are new for Sayward because the OCP is quite old. But development permits are the tool that you use to protect all the other values. So whether it's riparian, cultural, archaeological, steep slopes, fire smart hazards, those are development permits. And they're included in the Local Government Act as a tool that local governments can use to protect a range of values. And there's a whole list of things you can use development permits for. You can also use them to promote certain kind of economic development. So they're very useful tools. However, for citizens who are unfamiliar with them, they seem to be another level of bureaucracy. So there is a bit of a double-edged sword there. They do give you some control over requiring, for example, not to personalize it, but the work that Mr. Adama did on his road blasting. If you had development permits in place, he would have been required to get those permits prior to doing the blasting in order to look for archaeological protected artifacts, to protect the riparian rights, to prepare for steep slopes, those sorts of things. So it's helpful for local government. Citizens don't always like them. So that's just the way it is. So, but that is part of the official community plan feedback that we've got so far. One party saying you need more, one party saying, what are these? And why do we need these at all? These are going to hold me up. So, but that needs to be finalized. So the next step there would be for staff to bring those revisions to you. And of course, the consultant, Sydney, is working on that. And we've discussed this quite a bit. And then council can take first and second reading, set a date for the public hearing, probably sometime in January. And you may wish to have another meeting with KFN as well. You may not to have everybody there. You might want to have, some members of council attend because it's harder and harder to get all of chief and council together. So they may only have a couple, which means you could only have a couple. But whatever, you probably want to have another meeting to present your suggestions on reconciliation and the final draft, and then have a public hearing, which is a sort of a formal process where people from the citizens will speak. Here's what we think of your plan or our plan, and here's what we'd like to see. It's not meant to be a workshop kind of a discussion like this. It's where council hears from citizens. Citizens have their concerns recorded. Council takes that binder to its next meeting and decides whether it's happy with the plan the way it is or whether it wants to revise it slightly based on the feedback you hear at the public hearing. So the public hearing is just a listening meeting where you take the feedback and then you go to another meeting and do the final changes if you see any changes being needed. But that's the next step on the OCP. So it's the final step, and I think it's in good shape for you to take that next step. So I've got the zoning bylaw on here twice because it's so important. Obviously, it doesn't need to be on here twice. But the first one, it's under housing. So I guess just speaking on housing, one of the things about housing that all the literature is talking about, the trends in housing now are people are wanting smaller houses, they're wanting short-term rentals, and people are looking at mobility. So we're likely to see in the future that trend towards higher density, so maybe apartments and suites, which your current zoning bylaw already provides for suites in every house in the residential zone. So that's really good. It has some parameters in there about size, and of course that sometimes can be a barrier if you establish a minimum size for a house. I think the only thing that's in there now is the minimum width, and that's probably too, and then there's a restriction for mobile homes. So the future is probably more manufactured housing. It's something that's coming along as being more practical, quicker. They're built in a place and then rebuilt on site. So you want to make sure your zoning bylaw is flexible enough to accommodate those new trends in housing and new housing demands. It's a really important part of economic development, though. And the next one is sort of a carryover to what we've just talked about, the Marshall and Swift estimator, or something to be able to establish an efficient and fair billing system for new building permits. Which this could be under village operations as well. It's I guess maybe not so much an economic development initiative, although you don't want the permitting process holding up development and investment either. So you want it to be easy, streamlined. This would be a good one to establish. It's actually been a little difficult to get quick turnarounds on the building permits because our building official is, of course, with the SRD. So it wouldn't be harmful, I guess, to strengthen that a little bit, because I think that there will be a pretty increased demand, a spike demand if Mike's property starts to run those 37 residential lots. That's a fair bit of work to develop that building permit turnaround for those properties once they start to sell. You'll want to be able to have the staff and the resources or the arrangements with the SRD or a building official that you can use through another arrangement to be ready to keep that process moving, because that's going to be a real spike in economic development when those houses start building. Boy, that's a big industry supporter.
Any questions from council? No, moving on.
The next one relates to, it's an old carryover, assist and support prospective businesses. One of the things we've talked about was the mall. And restoring that building. I think it's still worth the partnership to look at trying to repurpose that structure. I had suggested to the owner a while ago that he look at Tin Town. I don't know if people are familiar with Tin Town. It's an opportunity for that mall, I think. And Tin Town is, for those who haven't been there, it's a section of Courtenay where they have residences on top and then some kind of a commercial or nonprofit business on the bottom. And it's a really vibrant little community. And the mall is a perfect place for that because it could provide for some really neat living, like artist studios or yoga studios or gun shop, or anything could be in there with some provisions to provide for residential living as well. And the whole front where all that parking is, that could be used for pop-up stores. There could be some kind of a community water fountain or park benches or some kind of a focal gathering place there. So if I've worked with the owner a little bit on that, and he, I think, started to look at that. He's got the property listed now with a realtor in Qualicum Beach or Parksville for that purpose. But the building obviously needs a fair bit of work. The tenants that he had lined up were a little bit unhappy with the state of the building, so more work would need to be done, but it would require a rezoning. So as part of the rezoning, it would be reasonable for council to require that the owner make some amenity. That could be some kind of a park or gathering structure, benches, that sort of thing in the middle there, that parking lot, which could create a bit of a hub for the community. So that's just one example, I think, of work that could be done to increase businesses' investment. And of course, once the Adama property develops, should council approve that, there'll be a lot of attraction down at the wharf for businesses as well. So there'll be opportunities there to assist builders. Of course, the big one there will be parking. So, but that's probably the way that you can assist businesses, because you already provide for permissive tax exemptions to any business that's got that qualifies for that. And it's difficult to do other benefits to private business other than the infrastructure around it. So.
Any questions from council? No. We're just going to take a 3-minute break here, or a 5-minute break. So please bear with me. Thank you.
Red's not on.
Is everybody back? We have Tom. Do
Yes.
we have? Okay, everybody's back. Thank you. Sorry for the short delay. And we'll move on.
Next one is work with local organizations and the tourism committee to promote tourism and attract business investment. The only real initiative that's on the right hand there is to promote their businesses using the business license directory. We could have an incentive for anybody with a business license, could get a free year ad or some other thing. But that's, you know, obviously you can add more there as well. I guess just
Councillor
one
Paul.
last thing before I stop on that. This is another one that's a double-edged sword. The business license is good because the purpose of a business license is that it provides for an opportunity for people operating businesses to pay for their portion of the infrastructure, so user fees. The downside is that people don't like to get a business license. They don't have to get one in the Valley, for example, because regional districts don't have the legal authority to offer a business service. They're not allowed to. So it makes it difficult for somebody who says, well, why do I have to get one in the village? I'll just operate in the Valley, then I don't have to get one. So that is a little bit of a double-edged sword. And but the benefit of having business licenses is twofold. One, we know how many businesses there are and what we can promote them. And two, they pay therefore a share of use of infrastructure for operating a business over and above of what a residential use would be.
Councillor Paulson?
I just wonder if there's a place in this section for re-establishing the working waterfront plan, because I think it was a 5 to 10 year plan and it hasn't really had anything worked on it for the last well, since COVID anyway. The walking trail is sorry, the walking, I guess it's path down to the wharf from the village center is I see it's fairly well used, as well as the viewing sites and information sites along Sayward Road. But there was discussion about increased development down at the end of Sayward Road in collaboration with the landowners down there and the developers. So I wonder if we could kind of give that a restart, look at resuming sort of discussions and going over the plan and updating it so that it's current for today's situations.
Sorry, CAO?
Thank you. I just wanted to add that on page 13 of the draft official community plan under the section 3.4, which is economic development, there is a policy in there that says encourage further development of Kelsey Bay waterfront in alignment with the working waterfront project to create better access for residents. So we could actually, we could actually take that, of course, the draft community plan is full of policies. So the ones that are important to you for next year, this is the place to put them for sure. So that's right. And of course, once they're in here, they can be carried forward to the next year, right? So.
Any other comments? Nope. Then moving on.
So the final one is supporting existing businesses. And again, we only know who they are because most of them aren't bricks and mortar. And that could be the future, is through business licensing. So the next section is infrastructure upgrades and asset replacement, probably one of the most important focuses. 2 months ago, Council passed a resolution to complete a water master plan. And that, again, was to get to put a plan in place for replacement of the water system. So maybe a 5 to 10 year project, which would include starting now to put funds together towards that reserve, and then gradually working on grant funding, and then probably getting voter assent to borrow as much as 30% to be able to replace the water system. And the first step in that is the water master plan. And the second one would be to complete the sewage capacity study, because the two go hand in hand to sort of look at how much do we have, what do we need, where are the highlights, where should we start? And then, ideally, what would happen with these two studies is it would give council the information and the engineered depth to be able to apply for a major grant to do the water, sewer, roads, and drainage all at once, say maybe over a 10-year period. So for probably 5 of those years, you'd be putting together the package and getting ready. And for maybe 4 of those, 2 or 3, I don't know. But for a good part of those years, you'd be doing portions of the village at a time. So one summer it would be this area, the next year, the next, maybe over a 5-year period, you'd have the whole thing replaced. And the studies will be able to identify where the work should proceed first. And it'll be almost essential to be able to get grant funding for that, which, pardon me, with the infrastructure costs now facing the province, I don't know if that means it's going to be more difficult to get grant funding or infrastructure, or easier, because it's going to be the industry of the future now, replacing infrastructure. And then the next one is use the asset management plan to identify projects for the financial plan. So council recently created the reserve fund for asset management. And so when you get to your financial planning section, putting some money, any money every year into some of those reserves would be linked to this strategic plan.
So that would be considered ongoing, correct?
Yes, ongoing.
Okay, thank you.
And most of these could be going down from here. And then, of course, would be the summary. The next step would be the planning for full replacement of water, sewer, drainage, and road infrastructure, which I've got 2023 would be the planning, but, you know, we're looking at probably a, I don't know, 20 to 2032. I think it's probably a 10-year project.
Any comments from council? No, moving on, thank you.
Of course, we don't know how long that will take, and there's still continuing overland flooding issues around McMillan. And of course, with the 2020 drainage plan, there's some immediate things, some of which council has already done. But there's more that can be done separate and apart from the previous one that we just talked about, where there'd be, obviously, we don't want to do a lot of work where you're digging up roads and then paving them over and then digging them all up again in 5 years to replace them. But there are some things in the drainage plan that could be done, opening up, replacing some of those connections as outlined in the plan. The plan was laid out with the short-term, the medium, and the long-term strategies. So continuing to make progress on that would be important, and seeking grant funding for each phase of it will be important. But it's nice that it's all laid out there now for you. It's easy and it's done. And the next ones are similar, continuing to make progress towards investing in reserve funds in accordance with the reserve policy that council passed several months ago. And that could be a steady, you know, one of the things I'll say about that is that it isn't surprising when you discover underbillings, but we have discovered several underbillings. And so it's important to be able to keep revenues up, and those extra revenues can be helpful to pour into these reserve funds, because generally what happens is all the revenues are put together and all the costs are put together, and that's the cost that people pay for user fees. But as we accrue, we go through and look at places where there are mistakes or where there's too much money left on the table. For example, the building permit process. Those are the sources of fund that could be used for reserve funding without imposing new taxes on people, and at least gives us some growth. I think I made council's aware that the Newcastle Dam made great progress in the 6-8 weeks that they started during that fish window in August. However, with the significant rainfall event in September, it shut down operations for a few days. The DFO was involved. There was what they call a HAD, which is a harmful damage to fish habitat that they noted because there was so much overflow that went in and brought some of the what they call concrete dust of the old dam into the fish-bearing stream. And so that was seen to be quite an important process that needed to be managed. And so next year, the site was tidied up, the water source is secured, but next window of fish, which would be July, I guess, or July 5th, is it August 15th? I can't remember the dates now. There's a short window, I think it's maybe July 15th to September 15th. They'll be in there again. Now, there will be new costs, and that'll be something that council will want to stay on top of. You know, there's a lot of uncertainty. Nobody removes dams every day, so so it is difficult to budget these things. But you know, it does seem like some of the contractors, maybe they could have worked a bit longer when the sun was shining and we got it done. You know, I think it could be shared, some of those extra costs. You know, I don't think the village should look at incurring all of those extra costs because the contractor had some issues that they maybe could have delivered on a little differently. So that'll be important to nail down. And those meetings will start at the same time that you're starting your financial planning meetings. So it'll be possible to identify if there are going to be extra costs. Most of them so far have been within the contingency. So that'll be something to keep monitoring through the financial planning process. But the good news is that the Newcastle Dam will be fully removed with all of the risks, and the construction of the Newcastle Weir will be is in place now, and it will continue, and it's fenced off and safe, so it's buttoned up as well as possible.
Any comments? No. Moving on. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Paulson.
I just wanted to. I just wanted to ask if we have a timeline for that. Should it be fall of 2022? Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, moving on.
Next one is the identify short and long-term projects for Kelsey Centre. There's probably a lot of things that we could be doing in the Kelsey Centre. You know, the after-school program and the seniors lunch is underway now, or not so much the lunch, but other activities for seniors. I think lawn bowling. But you know, there's lots of other things that facility could be used for. A business hub, for example, would be really helpful. It's empty a lot of the time. People who operate home-based businesses who maybe want to use a facility for meetings or with technical equipment, AV equipment, a business center. There's some room there for that, right? So it's worth putting some time into looking at how the Kelsey Centre could be used to generate revenue, because there's a lot of unmet opportunity there. That's separate and apart from recreation. You know, we do have a recreation manager who's managing the programs for children and adults, but this would be something separate and apart from that and could be led by another agency or another person, or it could be you know, there's a range of options there to make that, but it's the use of the facility that's really an asset. I've removed the next one because, of course, council did that. That was from 2 years ago to approve a reserve policy, and that's in place now. So that's removed. And then the final one in economic development is to continue to apply for infrastructure grants. I think it's really important to note that about almost 84% of council's revenue source was grant funding. Now that's primarily because of big projects like the water treatment plant, the Newcastle Dam. But it makes sense to continue to apply for those grants for these projects because, of course, the revenue source isn't enough to cover them. And so that's a very important, continues to be an important part of economic development to improve citizens' lives. And so far, those funds have been forthcoming, so that's great.
Does anybody have any comments on the section for economic development? No? Okay, well, this would be before we, sorry?
Mr. Mayor, I have one. The stat for 84% of revenue being attributed to grants is a little concerning to me, especially with the amount of money that the BC provincial government is now in debt due to COVID response and as well the recent flooding disasters. I have a feeling it's just a feeling, it's not in stone, that with the severe financial shortfalls that the BC provincial government is going to be facing in the very, very, very near future, that our grant revenue is going to be drying up quite considerably. And I don't think that we're going to get 84% of our revenue due to grants, because the provincial government probably will need at some point of time, and I believe Councillor Tinsey would probably be better equipped to expand on this, to reduce their expenditures and their costs because they've expended so much money. So I think this village would be wise to develop some contingencies or some strategies on a worst case scenario. Thank you.
CEO.
Just to add to that, I think it's important to note that the grants, the 84% were for projects that were mandated by the provincial government. So, you know, that for example, when the 4321 new drinking water standards came about, all municipalities were required to upgrade their water treatment facilities to provide for two types of treatment. So then the forthcoming grant funding was for that. Similarly, when the Newcastle Dam was deemed to be very high risk by the provincial government after the Mount Polley Dam failure, when they did all of the assessments, again, they determined that this needed to be replaced. And again, forthcoming was the grant money. So I agree that there could be less grant money, although it may also be the future industry of the province and the country actually is infrastructure growth. But still, you know, the remaining revenues that the village collects from citizens, again, citizens pay for their services. So the cost of water, sewer, etc., is calculated and then divided among the residents. So there's never any grant funding to operate services that are based to the community. Most of the grant funding has been to cover superordinary major big projects that have been mandated by the government. So that does sort of diminish the risk a little bit that Councillor Craig talked about.
Anybody else have a comment? Councillor Craig, you still have your hand up? I'm sorry, you're muted.
My apologies. Ask any council in the province, just to retort to that, the downloading of services from the BC provincial government is a huge concern to every single mayor and every single council in BC. So specifically, they might still offer grants for these services, but they might make the threshold that the community has to pay more. So in other words, they might have to come up with 25% or 30% of the cost, because the BC provincial government is real fond of downloading costs and services onto the municipal governments. It's part of one of their strategies. So again, my original comment holds, that we should develop a risk management worst case scenario approach.
Thank you, Councillor Tinsley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would agree with the comments here around the future changing in terms of availability of funds. I think we are addressing some of it with our reserve policies, and looking as we move forward with funding some of those things. But I would agree that depending on how things play out over the next couple of years, it's going to be important to look at those scenarios that become more apparent, possibly, given the changes that have been described. So I think they're good ideas. I think it's hard to look at the big projects in comparison, as the CAO has cited, to the ones that aren't mandated, and there will be a difference. And I think it's important that we look at those as we progress, particularly over the next couple of years, and with the results of our studies on the water supply need and the sewer need, and go from there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so just to clarify on that, pardon me, do we want to add another item in here with respect to infrastructure grant funding then? I'm not sure if that's where Councillor Craig was going, was to add another item on here.
Councillor Craig?
No, I wasn't actually specifically going anywhere other than to develop a future risk management scenario. That's where I was going with that. We need to have a future risk management scenario. So if you want to put a line item in there that we develop a risk management scenario for the possible increase of downloading of services and fees, I'd be all for it, but that's specifically where I was going. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe that should go under village operations as to be as part of the overall financial planning. Now, I mean, the downloading that you talk about is usually when a provincial government starts a program and funds it for 2 years, and then they don't fund it anymore, and then the community has to pick it up because it's so popular and everybody wants it. But in this case, I wouldn't exactly call reducing grant funding as downloading, because the citizens who benefit from it are still benefiting from it. They're just being required to pay more. So I don't know if I would call that downloading. It's really ownership of resources and paying for it. But at any rate, I think the idea of a risk management scenario could be maybe something we talk about under village operations, a 2 or 3 down, as opposed to under economic development. I guess it could go either, but where do you want it? Okay.
Okay, thank you. And before we get into Living Green, we are going to take a lunch break from now until 12:30. So we will see you all back here at 12:30. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Anybody could have come. I thought they could.
Yeah, nobody's here. Hello, folks. Are we all
Hello.
back?
Tom's
Councillor
back.
Craig? Councillor Craig, are you returned? Okay, we'll just wait a moment. Councillor Craig, have you returned?
Yeah, I'm just here now.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to be moving on to section of Living Green. CAO?
Thank you. So the first one here is the carryover, continue to pursue the goal of becoming a carbon neutral community. And the first item was the solar panels to be installed. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get the update for you from the CFO on why we haven't done that, because this has been in the strategic plan for a couple of years now. But it's something to pursue at the time of your financial plan to determine whether or not it's something that's economically viable. It seems to be a real growing industry and might be the time to install them. The other items under this include things like establish water meters for all commercial, industrial development and new development. That was the the resolution council passed a while ago. And of course, the bylaw itself will include the timelines. This is just the timeline to have the water meter, but the bylaw itself might give people a year, 2 year, 5 years to actually install the meter. Although you probably don't want to give the commercial industries that long, maybe a year. But the bylaws don't need to be in here. It's just that you want to get this done. Installing an electric vehicle charging station is something that could be under the economic development portion as well, because when people have when they have vehicle charging stations, they generally put them in a place that's near coffee shops, restaurants, or something that they're going to spend some time in town doing. So it becomes a bit of a destination for people on the highway. I know there's a charging station in Port McNeil. So, and there's, of course, Courtney has some and Campbell River has one. So in fact, people could be driving the whole island and could make, say, where to destination if they had to charge their vehicle. And then you'd want to know where to put it. Should it be down at the Kelsey Bay? If that where there's going to be any kind of a coffee shop, or would you want to put it near the mall, to maybe use the rec center? So that, that's another thinking, is whether you do want to put that in green or do you want to put it in economic development. But it's definitely going to be a good thing to have, because it's going to draw people in off the highway, because they're going to need to charge their vehicle, and it's like a destination for them. Continue to work with the provincial government and Comox First Nation to secure an economically viable community forest. I think there has been a community forest set aside that was deemed to be problematic, either because of its location or maybe it was because of the contents of the harvest. Was it mostly alder, or I can't remember why it was deemed to be unsuitable, but there was some thinking that we needed to get a better one. So that to secure that with the KFN, that actually would be a good thing to include on an agenda for another follow-up community to community. So it's not just the community plan. You could talk about the community forest as well, maybe. And then to develop the village trail system. So that could include the railings on the Kelly Bridge, but there's also other parks. For example, there's a little triangle that was donated to the village as part of the Van Brocklin subdivision, and it's deemed park, and it's right behind Jerry Brower's place. It's a big triangle of park, which we've now shown on the community plan as park. So it's right in the estuary. It's a really good site to have. I think that would be perfect for seniors who can't really maybe get in on the trails or don't want to go in there because maybe they're worried about bears or something else, cougars. But this little triangle would be a really nice place to develop for people with mobility issues. It could be a raised boardwalk with maybe some interpretive signage about the birds and some of the wildlife in there, and it would be easily accessible. So that's the sort of thing you can talk about more with respect to your financial plan. But if you were wanting to develop the trail system, that's an easy place. There's also, of course, the current walking path that's part of the waterfront trail and all the other trails around the trail into the gazebo. There's any number of things that you could put bones around this initiative here. It's just to encourage people to get out, people who are in the environment to appreciate and protect the environment. So
there'd be one other thing. I think it would be nice to look at access in terms of some type of structure, some type of deck that is in part of the estuary as a viewing.
Yeah.
Down over towards the Spit area. I know that portion of it is owned by Island Timberland, but some kind of deck that has a large and easy access and not necessarily attached to the trail, but something closer into town that we can use that waterfront property a little bit more readily and have people come and be able to walk onto the deck, similar to what they have in Campbell River, a Discovery, not obviously as large, but give them the opportunity to spend some time on there, looking at the estuary, looking at the birds and the wildlife. I think that's something that we should look at going into the future by partnering up, for example, with KFN and WFP and all the other players in the community.
That raises another issue, in that is those old ships that were sunk in there as the They're very dangerous. There's, it's probably something to talk about with the municipal insurance agency because people walk on top of there and, kids like to climb them. And apparently somebody once fell in and the tide came in. And if they hadn't been heard, they would have probably perished in there. So they're really a risk and a liability. So it would be worth exploring to see just, what could be done to either fence them or signage or something.
Should that be added?
Well, yeah, I'm just wondering if maybe we could add that under village operations, which is coming right up.
Same thing
there.
with the deck, a viewing
Well,
station?
the deck could, yeah,
That can go into-
either one. Yeah, yeah. Or it could be under tourism too, as well, the deck.
True.
I think the living green is really about reducing our footprint.
So would that be the time to suggest that the next vehicles that are purchased by the village are going to be, more
Electric.
green friendly, electric?
Yeah, and that'd be another
Electric
good reason
truck,
to have a
electric
charge.
Equipment. And at that point, hopefully we would have a charging station or have one put
Yeah.
in.
It's a great
So,
idea.
that may be something council wants to look at mandating in the future, that all future vehicles from the village and village owned should be more green, should be electric.
We can add that under the very first, continue to pursue the goal of becoming carbon neutral. Seek to replace all fleet vehicles with electric vehicles. Or at least hybrids. Because they're saying now I forget what year, by a certain year, all vehicles are going to be electric. It's probably going to happen really quickly, 20 years or something. Which means the prices will come down and the product will be improved. Yeah, okay, so seek to replace fleet vehicles with hybrid or electric. So we'll put that in the second bullet underneath the solar panels.
Would there be consideration for the current useful life of the vehicles? Like, it sounds like we're targeting something we're going to do tomorrow, and I believe at least one of the vehicles is fairly new.
Yeah, we could add that. Seek to replace fleet vehicles at the end of their life, or when time for replacement.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, and the final one under that is to continue to expand the community garden and flower gardens throughout the village. And I think the thing that's on there should be striked out, grant funding received. Well, I suppose that's part of it is grant funding, but well, I think that's this right-hand column is just to show that how do you know what you've got there? So, okay, so the goal is to expand the community gardens. And then the progress measure is, well, we've received the grant funding, but that's not really the progress measure. That's just part of it, right? So the progress measure would be that we have beautiful community gardens, well-managed and well-maintained gardens.
Councillor Paulson?
Thank you. One of the things I'd like to let you know is that since I've been working with the Campbell River Food Hub and all the associated organizations with them, they have been working towards forming a group or groups in the northern part of the island to arrange for having food distribution centers, community kitchens, places where people can come and get something to eat. It's all about food, but it's not about just food. It's also about homelessness and access to these kind of places. And we're having a meeting, the first meeting with a group of interested Sayward residents on Monday with the coordinator for this committee that's formed in Campbell River, and it's called the Strathcona Community Food Hub. And it sounds very exciting, and they're looking at, there's very many different grants and things, and part of some of the groups that belong in Campbell River are community gardens. So that may become a part of development through the food hub. So it's that's just something that's just getting off the ground. And I was very excited and overwhelmed that 14 or 15 people applied within 24 hours of when I put the notice on around Sayward. And that's just around Sayward. So that's a private group. So the meeting is happening on Monday, and we'll see where it goes from there, because it involves farmers, the different garden clubs, and the fire department people have signed up, and it's just a very wide variety of community, like names I've not heard before, and a lot of newcomers too have stepped up to be part of it. So there'll be more coming on that. So, but that's one way that we can look at expanding the community garden.
Should we include, should we include that? I'm just wondering if we should include some reference to the, so instead of continuing to expand the gardens, or should this be under village operations as a using of the community gardens to provide to contribute to the food hub or participate? Do you want to put that in under operations when we get there? Food hub business? Okay. So, okay. Okay, so the next one is professional development. This used to say staff professional development, and I just changed it because obviously council and volunteers all benefit from any kind of training that we can provide support for. So the goal would be ensure council staff and village volunteers receive adequate emergency management training, and the village has an emergency response plan in place. Of course, that's something that we work on all the time. It's never, ever done. Because there's always more things to put to it, but that one seems to be fine. And then the next one, continue council and staff and volunteer professional development through various municipal and professional associations, ensuring the village continues to receive good value for the resources expended. And as you know, there's money in the financial plan each year for staff and for each council member to participate in various training opportunities that could be defined by that member or could be defined by council as a group to look at what you collectively want or what individually you want, because there's really quite a few opportunities for training now, especially with everything being virtual. It used to be all conferences, but now you can almost do anything anywhere. So that is really important because, and you know, I think given the fact that there are so many volunteers that do things, that it does open it up to more than just, obviously it has to be more than just staff. And then I've taken out the new employee performance evaluation system. That was from 2019, and that's been put in place. So that's crossed out. But there could be more things under professional development if you see needs for that. I mean, I think we talked about, you know, it's becoming more and more technical to manage things like the water treatment plant. So I think, you know, staff need to be able to manage the computer end of things. And so there'll probably be more opportunities for training. For, you know, I think our staff, Mike and Tony, generally every year have to take an upgrading course for their certification for small water systems. And there'll continue to be more and more demands like that as everything becomes more complicated. Next one is tourism development. Continue the village beautification program, including upgrading signage, cleaning and painting village buildings and structures, enhancing village gardens. I'm not sure what this means, the bus stop at the campground repaired or replaced. That's a carry forward, so maybe people know about that, and I don't. Okay, and so it needs to be repaired or replaced? Okay. So we can take that off.
Yeah.
And I don't, ORV signage. I don't know what that is.
Sorry, I think it's supposed to be emergency, that emergency signage, that emergency route.
Oh,
No.
emergency route, evacuation
Councillor Craig.
routes.
Councillor Craig knows, he's got his hand up here.
That was,
Councillor Craig.
yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was an initiative by former Councillor Bill Ives regarding the off-road vehicles, ATVs and side-by-sides, and he was proposing to put signage on the routes of the off-road vehicle trails to encourage tourism to the village. Thank you.
Or even maps would be good. Map, route signage and maps. That would be a great thing because people do come. There was about 15 of them piled up at the Roberts Creek campground today, getting all ready with their vehicles offloaded. So it seems to be big industry. Is there anything else that we want to add to this one? To beautification for the tourism development? You know, I think you know, one of the things that it's not really related to tourism development, but bylaw enforcement is kind of there, because if the town doesn't look tidy and neat, it affects tourism. So you know, managing the bylaw, property maintenance bylaw, is important because it encourages people to take care of their dwellings so that they look nicer, you know, without the pile up of cars and dilapidated fences and that sort of thing. You might want to put something like that in here, or anything. Okay, the next one is work with local organizations and the regional district to enhance signing and wayfinding in Sayward. So that's, again, they're sort of the same thing. You know, most people don't know about Sayward. They don't drive down the road. They don't know that those wonderful estuary trails are there, and so promoting it, I guess, is what you're looking at here, is how to promote through signage and mappage and, I guess, advertising. Or it could be something high level. It could be work with the Sayward Future Society to establish initiatives towards promoting tourism. You know, it's, you know, hosting an annual tourism conference. You know, you want to put something in.
I'd like it to say working with the local tourism committee, because the tourism committee is under the umbrella of Sayward Futures, but it's it has an executive of its own, and they have worked at that before. The reason that the kiosk down at the junction was opened before was so that the tourists traveling by, which Campbell River told us there was approximately 500,000 vehicles that went past the junction to going north or going south every year, and to capitalize on getting people to come into Sayward, because they drive by and say, oh, well, you know, someday we should go there. But if there's a tourism kiosk, which we did establish, they stop there and they're encouraged to come into Sayward to increase the economy of Sayward. And it proved to be very profitable for us when they came down to the store and on the wharf, and, you know, rented fishing rods and bought things from the gift store. So I think working to get the tourism committee to get that site expanded, and maybe have employed, like paid people to work there rather than the volunteers, which they tried at first. So there's lots of opportunity to attract people to Sayward. No, no, we don't even lease it. The lady that owns it lives in Duncan, and she bought it as a an investment, and she wants absolutely nothing to do with even having $1 a year for it, because it would upset her finances. And if her financial person had to write $1 in for a year of leasing that. So she has given us free use of it. The only problem is that she is elderly, and if she does die, then it's looking at what's going to happen to the property in the future.
They would be interested in that, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry.
Anyone, someone has the mic on. That might be a really good strategy. So, I mean, that's something that you could pursue. Do we want to put that in here, or is that too out there?
Sorry, go ahead, Councillor Tinsley.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just on the next page, at least on the printed version, I believe that's covered under the support and work with the tourism committee, joint initiatives. It's the next point in the tourism development. It's not specific to what Councillor Paulson mentioned, but wouldn't that fit into that?
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I think you could be, you could be more specific. It is a strategic document, so it doesn't have to be detailed, but it could be specific in the sense that you might want to say, host a biannual meeting, or, monthly, invite them. You could put some more focus on there rather than just leave it a little bit loose. I would think that would be good.
The tourism committee does meet monthly, and then they did change to about every 6 weeks. So they do have regular meetings, and because they became an arm's length from the village, it used to be that tourism was included in the village budget and that sort of thing. That's when they began to grant $2,200 a year to the tourism committee for their operations, and one council member was agreed or was chosen to attend those meetings.
Maybe you could consider putting host at least one annual meeting between council and the tourist committee. I mean, because just one meeting generates a lot of discussion, and from that you come up with an idea, and from that you might put it in your financial plan or your strategic plan for the following year for something specific.
And in previous councils, Sayward Futures and the tourism committee was invited to cow meetings.
So how would you like to frame that then? Do you want to leave it at host an annual meeting, or do you want to have more than one meeting? I think it would be good to firm it up a little bit so it's not just loose. Invite the tourism committee to at least one meeting a year or something like that.
Yeah, I believe that it definitely needs to be at least one meeting a year, and it should fall prior to, for example, in January of that year for the planning of the following season.
Sorry. So host an annual meeting with the tourism committee as a component of financial planning. Or
Sure.
something. Okay, the final one is village operations. And so this is basically, the first one is relating to policies. A lot of the policies that are in there now have been updated. So I think there is a conflict of interest, criminal record search, hiring, permissive tax exemption, respectable workplace, procurement bylaws. Of course, the building, the zoning. I've left the cannabis on there because it's one, that bylaw prohibits cannabis sales. So it's really the only bylaw that prohibits something that's now legal. So, you know, council might want to consider whether or not they want to have a barrier like that in there. I mean, it's really up to you, but that's the rest of the ones that are crossed out have been completed. So that's that one. The next one is to review the fee structure. We've talked about that. There was a new fees and charge bylaw established in 2020, and it's always being revised regularly. So that's crossed out, but yet it's there as to support anything else that comes along. Here we see the building permit, Marshall and Swift again. So, you know, that can be taken out of here or taken out of the other one. It's really up to council. It's kind of village operations. It's linked to economic development because housing is so important. So where would you like to leave that one? Which one? It sort of speaks to the optics of it, where you put it. If you're doing it to support services or if you're doing it as a development initiative.
Any comments, council?
I think it's a support services to ensure we're getting the fair market revenues for the village relative to it. So that's my suggestion.
Councillor Craig?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Is it a case of tomato versus tomato? You know, as long as it's in there, it's in there. As far as I'm concerned, either one is fine as long as it's in there and it can be referenced. Otherwise, Councillor Tinsley was just fine on his recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Polson? Councillor Polson agrees.
The only other two things that we have under village operations, we have review tax ratios, and that should be done all the time. I honestly don't know how you do that though, unless you hire someone who knows what they're doing, because it's a very complicated process to establish the tax ratios, working with the assessment ratio. One thing might be to work with the other municipalities in the SRD. So that's one option, is to host a meeting among other communities to sort of create a bit of a working ship to see how close we are. Obviously, people are going to be having different expenses. Taxes are based on the costs, but it would be nice to know. I know, for example, Gold River has a log sort. So it would be good to compare. Are we taxing Western enough? I don't know, but I think they are. So that would be a good starting place. So there's things like that that can be done. And I think that would be worth doing. But again, it's something that's sort of a skill specific thing, and it would need somebody who has a real good handle on the tax code. The last two we just added. One is risk management that was talked about earlier. I think Councillor Craig who brought that up with respect to the risk of losing some of our grant funding. So, some kind of a plan to look at risk management for infrastructure replacement, and that's going to be looking mostly at revenues, I guess. And then the food hub item that Councillor Polson referenced a moment ago is encourage participation in the food hub. Or possibly some of the gardening. Did you want to put anything specific in, like using the community gardens to generate food or any of those sorts of things, planting trees that provide for edible food, that kind of stuff?
I think just making a general reference to collaborating with the Food Hub in their initiatives. It may be having to have a piece of property so that a building can be built on it. I mean, in the future, it could be part of housing, that sort of thing, so that it's close to where the people that need it most are able to get to it. It could involve homelessness. So it's not just food, mental health services, and all of so many of those resources are dependent on a person having enough food to eat. And, you know, it creates better mental acuity and even with school children. So it's a project that's probably going to grow like Topsy and hopefully will benefit the whole community, the valley and the village. And oh, it's an old story. When you grow like Topsy, Topsy had a little tuft of hair that came out of the top of his head, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. It's a story from kindergarten. So that's like 68 years ago.